Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. We got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to be getting into the Kennedy assassination, Oswald, and beyond. We've got author Larry Hancock with us. The book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. We're going to ask him about the declassifications and so much more. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. And we are back. The book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. We are with Larry Hancock. Now, before we get into the book, before we get into the declassifications, etc., before we get into what's out there, how did you first come to question the assassination in the first place? Was it kind of an out-of-the-gates thing? I mean, obviously, I'm 45 years young. It's only after the fact, and there's already kind of a aroma in the air that we were lied to about that event. By the time I'm born, the documentary series The Men Who Killed Kennedy is out there. The Zapruder film has been shown on television by Geraldo Rivera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're starting to gain momentum on distrust of the government in that narrative. But I'd like to get your perspective, start to finish, to when you really start looking at this thing and saying, hey, we're not being told the truth.
Well, mine started a little bit earlier since I'm 77, and since I was living at the time of the assassination. I was a sophomore in high school. So I heard it that afternoon first time. But the suspicion occurred early on. I can recall watching live TV the next day and watching Lee Harvey Oswald shot by Jack Ruby on television and hearing my father say, well, now we'll never know. So that kind of sets the stage for the skepticism right there. But I really didn't re-enter it until in the 90s. And actually, my wife came to me and said, oh, some reporter from Dallas just published a book about the Kennedy assassination, and he was there. Maybe you want to read it? So I read it, and that was it. From about 1995 until now, I just moved into the study of that as well as other historical subjects. But so I've been really involved in it for over 30 years at this point, which some might call obsessive, reasonably enough.
For me, and for someone who kind of got into this arena, quote unquote, obsessing over 9/11, I can certainly relate. And, during that time period of the mid 90s, there is also a huge boost in public awareness and interest in the Kennedy assassination through the Oliver Stone documentary. And if you didn't live through it, you wouldn't understand it. But you had this movie that was 3.5 hours long. It had just about every big Hollywood star at the time. Stone was at the top of his game. He had made, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, just a slew of pictures that were very politically relevant. And then this thing comes out, and by the end of it, he's requesting all the documents be declassified. He shows the date that they're supposed to be shown to the American people. And this thing, it was on the cover of Time Magazine and Newsweek, and it was all the buzz and rage. When that happened, did that really ignite it beyond just interest? Was it right then and there? And then, I don't want to say in short order, because it sure felt like a lifetime to me, because I was in, middle school about the time that happened, and the internet doesn't start becoming accessible until the late 90s. But as soon as the internet was accessible in the late 90s, that's when I started to dig into all sorts of goodies, including the Kennedy assassination and the documents that were publicly available. Did you have like a similar thing during that time period?
Yeah, the movie was a trigger without a doubt, because it was a great movie. It was had a great deal of impact, very stirring. You didn't leave during those 3 hours. You stayed there for the movie. But the legislation that was passed based on what that movie created really started to come in. We started to see documents really not before the end of the decade. And now we've seen hundreds of thousands of documents. And for me, I became a document geek. History is my subject. I do history in several different genres. And so I started, you know, as you mentioned, even before the internet, I was on CompuServe, on the CompuServe JFK forum for years before we even had general internet and forums and Facebook groups or anything. But I became a document geek, ordering literally thousands of pages of documents out of the National Archives with a friend who would go there routinely and collect them. And that really, tracing those documents is where I went with my research. I did interview people. A lot of the firsthand witnesses started getting involved in historical conferences in Dallas. But yeah, it was I would say the legislation and the document releases that took us to where we are now, where I could write this kind of book. This kind of book really couldn't have been written. The books I've written on JFK couldn't have been written before, say, the past 10, 15 years at max. The data wasn't there.
So let's talk about that, because I think that's extremely important. For instance, we've got this executive order telling us we're going to get all the JFK, RFK, and MLK files. Color me still skeptical, but at the same time, I'm hoping, just like I hoped during the first administration, the 2 times we were told we were going to get the JFK documents. Now, what's interesting there is we were told that, and now magically 2,000 documents have just appeared that supposedly weren't even available in the Warren Commission. That gives me pause and hesitation. At the same time, when they did release those 2 dumps, there were documents in particular that were of interest to me in the realm of Warren C. DeBrew, the FBI, his connection to Oswald, etc., and work that I had done prior to that on that, and some stuff that had come out after that. Okay, still a lot of redactions, still a lot of documents fully just kept from the public, aside from those 2,000. You talk about those 10 to 15 years and those declassifications. So again, you're well into the 2000s, the beginning of the 2010s, before you even get to see this stuff. And that's long after we're supposed to get all of it. When you first start looking at this stuff in the mid-90s, you mentioned the skepticism out of the gates. That's great. What narrative did you think that you were getting into mid-90s, early 2000s, before all this stuff comes out, when it is just, largely the work of Jim Marrs and others, and the court cases with Garrison, etc.? Obviously, the film, and like you said, the raw data that you're getting from the National Archives, that even then is extremely partial data that you won't have available for 20 years. So what's the narrative up until you say 2000 or so that you're looking into that makes the most sense?
Well, unfortunately, I looked at this. I mean, when we talk about rabbit holes, as you say, Jim Marrs was the reporter that I was talking about. And his book presented like 6 different motives. So did I look at 6 different motives? Yeah. All those narratives, and spent a good part of my life. It's kind of like my wife would come up and say, well, so how's that going? Well, I just spent 2 years on it and I had to drop it because it's not really there. So in any event, the narrative that really ended up, I think, comes from Peter Dale Scott, who was an early researcher.
And by the way, not just an early researcher, the guy that literally created the term deep state that everybody uses at this point.
Yeah.
And by the way, I miss Jim Marrs. I was lucky enough to spend time with him several times and interview him several times. And Peter Dale Scott is a centerpiece in my documentary film Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, because Peter Dale Scott is the man. So please continue.
Yeah, I love Peter. Peter and I met several times, and Marrs and I would meet routinely every year. And every year I would say, Jim, you realize what you've done to my life? And Jim would be completely unrepentant. Like I could never get through to him. Like, in any event, Peter Dale Scott's concept of a negative template, and the negative template, especially in regard to 2 areas, in regard to Lee Harvey Oswald. In other words, what should we see? And I spent years literally getting to understand how the CIA and FBI operated in terms of process. what contacts should you see? What documents should you? What would you expect? What's the real template if nothing is missing? And so I think that's an important part. And we see that in regard to Oswald in two or three places. And you mentioned a bit of that. We certainly see it in regard to his CIA files. The first CIA file was created a year after Oswald went into Russia. And then that information was compartmentalized. It was created in counterintelligence and should have gone to the Soviet division and didn't. So what's going on? Why not the Soviet division? Quite frankly, if you were putting somebody in as an agent or an asset, it's Soviet division that would be running it. So why are they not seeing what CISIG is seeing? Um, the same thing for ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. When Oswald goes to Russia, we absolutely know that should have been investigated from a security standpoint. What's our exposure? Those files are not there. They should have been. So ONI, CI, then
And let
later
me just
on,
stop
we
you
get,
really quickly. For those that don't know what ONI is, that's the Office of Naval Intelligence. And the Office of Naval Intelligence does not get talked about enough because they're kind of used as a proxy in these intel networks. In fact, there's a document out there that's contested. I've always kind of thought it was a real document. I guess we're going to see with this document dump between the head of the CIA, the head of the Secret Service, and basically they say that the CIA is the one that trained Oswald through the Office of Naval Intelligence. And that's really where I found Warren C. DeBrew, because they mention his memo and it alludes to that. And then you find out that DeBrew is, Oswald's FBI handler out in New Orleans. He just magically follows Oswald to Texas just before this assassination occurs. And then he's put in charge of the initial investigation right after it happens and puts that out there. And he's not a name really that got thrown around much, but I believe it was in 74 or 76 when CBS does that little investigation documentary. They put DeBrew right on camera and asked him about it, and he kind of chuckles. He says, no. And I believe it was, who was it, Ernesto? One of the guys that was one of his assets had said that he saw Oswald with him all the time, came into his bar, and that he was threatened by DeBrew, that he said, if you say anything about this relationship, I'll kill you, you son of a bitch. And that's another time that DeBrew just smiles at the camera. And he said, I don't remember treating him that way ever. I always treated him with great respect. Sure you did, Warren. Sure you did. Please continue.
Well, you will see a lot about DeBrew in the book, in the Oswald puzzle. We spent a lot of time in New Orleans on him, what he should have been doing, what got into the record, what didn't get into the record. Horace Peñas, the fellow that you were talking about in Havana Bar, who I think definitely did get harassed. But you mentioned another name that actually gets to be key from New Orleans. It's Ernesto Rodriguez.
That's it. That's
who
how
is
it
the
is.
first guy that Oswald meets. Well, one of the things that we managed to dig out of the files just recently, this is like within the last 2 years, is it just happens that Ernesto Jr. and his father, who were both very active in New Orleans and anti-Castro affairs, the son and brother of those two, Emilio Rodriguez, is a senior political action officer at CIA JM Wave in New Orleans, from New Orleans to Miami. He's in Miami. And so we have this immediate connection between, as soon as Oswald, he's the first guy Oswald talks to in New Orleans when he starts getting into the Cuban thing. So immediately the person he's talking to, his brother, is a senior guy at CIA, Special Affairs, Cuba Project in Miami. You know that they're going to be talking about this because this is brother's business and both their interest about this new guy. And the first thing they and the student directorate, who Ernesto refers him to, do is to check out Oswald and send somebody to investigate Oswald, representing them as a pro-Castro person. Like, which are you? Are you pro-Castro or anti-Castro? So Oswald goes on the radar early on in New Orleans to the CIA, to the DRE, and it generates a story that we pay a lot of attention to. And getting back to your question about the templates and what's missing, all of the reports that should have been filed, the case officer files in Miami, the student directorate files about their contact with Oswald and their reporting on Oswald, because they're being paid for propaganda. That's what the thing is, and Oswald is ideal for them for propaganda. We were actually, and Jeff Morley was involved in this, they started a public propaganda campaign in August of 1963 around Lee Harvey Oswald. So Lee Harvey Oswald is the CIA's denying this, and they're still withholding the records in court, which actually they didn't turn them over to NARA, so you'd have to flush them out legally, hopefully with this new legislation. But that's another major area of what's missing. There's whole image of what's going on with Oswald in 1963 that's been compartmentalized within the CIA. And we even have documents, and it's like, this part of the CIA is not telling that part of the CIA about what they know about Oswald. When he goes to Mexico City, and Mexico City says, well, Lee Harvey Oswald was here. Tell us something about him. And what comes back is, well, we know he was in Russia. Wait a minute. He's been back for a year, guys. We know you know about him. Why are you not telling Mexico City? Surely there was something operational going on, not necessarily with his knowledge, but something that is being withheld from us still. And that's one of those areas that we're hoping for.
The book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. We're going to get into that. What can we expect with this declassification, and how much is already out there in the public arena that really proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Oswald is or was an intelligence agent slash asset all the way up until he got shot by Jack Ruby on tape. We're going to take that break. We're going to come back. Tape. It was on live TV. What am I talking about? Making sense of the madness after this.
Hey folks, it's your buddy John Rich here and co-founder of Old Glory Bank. Let me ask you a question. Why would you trust your banking with people that hate you? Well, you shouldn't. We're building a freedom economy, and now we have a pro-America bank. It's called Old Glory Bank. Check it out at oldglorybank.com and open yourself an account today.
Old Glory Bank is a full-service, FDIC-insured online bank with business and consumer banking and customers in all 50 states. It takes just 8 minutes to open an account at oldglorybank.com.
Vladimir Putin will remain in office until 2036.
Putin is being called bold.
What's your strategy to bring them back to the Stone Age?
Daring. You won't be able to look away.
How can his kingdom last?
Putin. Rated R. In select theaters January 10th.
And we are back. Let's talk Lee Harvey Oswald here, because it seems to me we already have, just with what you just discussed with DeBrew, the CIA, the fact the guy goes over to Russia, comes back, and it's no big deal. It's like, whatever. Hey, none of that would make sense. Everybody talks about him being a lone and crazed gunman. Go watch him talk for 10 minutes. Really smart guy. This is a guy that's in his early 20s, is able to get a wife overseas, another wife back home. I mean, he screams intelligence asset. Speaks fluid languages. He's out there, like you said, speaking about pro-Castro pop propaganda. Go watch the radio shows he's on. He's no dummy. So what is in the public arena with Oswald? You talked about the 2010s. Did a lot of that stuff come out during that time period? Did we have a lot of that stuff beforehand? And how much has come out about these handlers, if you will, and his connection to these agencies?
I think dividing it into sections is a good approach, because actually a lot of it was there. It was in the Warren Commission collected it and put it in their 26 volumes. And then they just chose to cherry pick what they needed to characterize them as a lone nut, antisocial, asocial. The reason they did that, quite frankly, is they couldn't find a motive for them. people that they talked to about Lee Harvey Oswald said, oh, I mean, he believed in the things that the Kennedy administration was doing. He believed in, integration. He believed in racial equity. He believed in, he was very concerned about, economics and people being able to access health care and so on and so forth. So he's very concerned about all those things. And when he talked about Kennedy, he actually was heard to say that Kennedy might be the only one who could actually reach some kind of accommodation with Khrushchev, prevent a war. It's very positive. Actually, you talked about New Orleans. When he was on radio in New Orleans, the host really kind of tried to push him into saying something negative about JFK, personally. And the way he came back is, no, what I oppose is the long-term administration policies about Cuba. That's my thing. It's about Cuba. It's not about JFK. So they had to really hunt to characterize him the way we're talking about. So that data was always there. You could find it if you looked for it. What has new has come out, a couple of different things, a couple of different sources. His good friend in Russia, Ernst Titovitz, has gone public with a lot of his interaction with Russia, with Oswald in Russia, what Oswald was really doing. Turns out to be a great source that, of course, the Warren Commission and pretty much everybody ignored what was already going on in Russia, because the fact that Oswald made lots of friends in Russia, dated multiple women, had girlfriends, proposed once, was turned down once, married, had a child. None of that really gives you the kind of picture that they wanted to craft. So that was there. You just had to pull it out, which is what we did, and give the right picture. What new, I think, has come out since then are a lot of these things of identifying where we should find information, and it's not released and wasn't made available even to the Warren Commission. I'll give you an example. The Warren Commission was concerned, for example, because of Oswald's Cuban contacts and interest, that perhaps Cuba was involved. Perhaps there was a link there. I mean, he was very was their motive there? So they looked by J. Edgar Hoover would have loved to find a motive for Cuba and against communism. And he actually even asked Johnson, we found the document, said he asked Johnson not to entirely make Oswald a lone nut, because maybe he could find a Castro-Cuba connection or Russia, and Johnson just kind of ignored that. But what we found is that the CIA had actually lied, not only to the Warren Commission, but the House Select Committee, and they had conducted an investigation of their own people, CIA officers, anti-Castro Cubans they were working with, Cubans, the whole Cuban connection. They had conducted that in 1964, early 1964. We even know the questions that asked. We've got everything about the investigation except the report, which becomes highly suspicious. If the report's negative, they would have handed it off. Clearly, there's something there that we haven't seen. Did it just disappear? If it just disappeared, it's even more suspicious. And one of the reasons is because now we know, quite frankly, enough to consider one of the fellows who ordered it and put it together as a potential suspect. His name's Sforza. He was a CIA operations officer with David Morales, a friend of Emilio Rodriguez. There's this nexus there. And the other thing that goes along with your questions, the good news with all these other documents that have come out, what we've been able to do is break all the cryptonyms and pseudonyms in the documents. The strange thing is, because CIA officers got as perplexed by this as we do reading them, so they made annotations in the margins about, what the true name of this individual is and what the, pseudonym are they using at this point in time. So we not only got the documents, which is what they expected us to see, we were able to reverse engineer the people that were involved in a lot of things that now have become very suspicious, which is a fascinating thing that we were able to break that out. And they were there in the first place, again, obviously to conceal information from the Russians, but it worked for us too until we break.
So let's talk about the names that you believe that we know that are involved in this nexus. Whether or not, because I hear this talking point all the time. Everybody involved by now has to be dead. I don't necessarily know that. For me, especially during that time period, you had a lot of young people. I mean, look at Oswald himself, that were clearly involved in, military / intelligence operations globally, black ops, if you will. Our government had a long history, even before that, working FBI, CIA with organized crime, if not running it, in some cases, even then. Again, that's one of those narratives that's really thrown around a lot, other than the Cubans, was the mafia, right? Sam Giancana, etc. What are the names that you believe that we know that are a part of this? What are some of the dead ends? And is everybody, quote unquote, dead that was a part of this operation?
Everybody is not dead. I will say that. Some of them are still living, that I would suspect, but some of their relatives are also living. I've gotten emails and calls from people that talk about, their uncle being such a sweet old man. All he does now is sit on the boardwalk and drink coffee, and how, clearly he'd never be involved in something like this. So you have some people still living and relatives as well. But to answer your question, I would tier it from top to bottom. At the top, you're talking about what I would call the people that incited the action, the essentially that brought the real problem and the real issue that triggered the attack in Dallas, which was the fact that they told the people they were talking to that in addition to Laos, everybody was concerned about JFK and neutrality in Laos, even though it was working at the time. Everybody was concerned that he might do the same thing in Vietnam. But they were also really concerned by that fall with the fact that Castro had reached out to Kennedy and essentially said, look, we need to do a deal. I don't trust the Russians anymore. They deserted me. I'm willing to punt the Russians. Can we do a deal to get through this economic embargo? Could we restore normal relations? And this was all back channel, but Castro initiated it. That word was passed down from people like Angleton and Harvey, who had been very deeply into the Cuba project, was passed down to the guys in Miami who had been involved in trying to bring down the Castro regime, trying to assassinate Fidel Castro. They had been in this since 1960. Some of them had been at the Bay of Pigs. They'd been running missions. They'd lost friends. They'd very deeply and emotionally into this. And we're talking about CIA operations officers and people they've been working with, their surrogates, their Cuban surrogates. These guys are tightly bonded. They trust each other. And essentially, these are people like David Morales, Rip Robertson, Tony Sforza, people that had been in Cuba, like Sforza had, and run stay behind networks, and then came out and were running the Cuban intelligence network out of Miami against them. Morales, who had trained guys that had gone in. And so Robertson was at the Bay of Pigs. He was one of the two officers there. So they're very invested in this. We know from remarks from the Cubans themselves, when that message was passed to them starting in September, October, they were essentially told, Kennedy is about to give it away. You hated him after the Bay of Pigs. You hated him after the missile crisis. And if somebody doesn't do something now, you're done. You're not going home. Castro will be in power forever. And that was the nexus. That's where the attack gelled, we feel, in Miami. But bringing in, and you mentioned it, Johnny Roselli. Johnny Roselli, key figure in this since 1961. First poison plots against Castro. He's the crime.
Well, hold on. You know what? That's a good segue because we do have to take another break. How do we go from that network of intelligence, Cuba, Bay of Pigs, anti-Castro unit into the quote-unquote Italian mafia that didn't exist at the time, by the way. Oh, no mafia either. I love it's not new. Fake news and narratives, not new, everybody. Been going on for an extremely long time. It is making sense of the madness. We're going to take a break. More Larry Hancock after this.
Attention business owners and entrepreneurs. Patriot TV is launching a brand new TV series showcasing American-made products, and your business could be featured. Whether you sell your products online on Etsy or Shopify and dream of reaching millions of viewers on smart TVs like Samsung, Sony, TCL, and LG, or apps like Roku, Android, and Apple TV, this is your chance. We're searching for US-based businesses offering all types of products and services proudly made in the USA. If you've ever wanted to showcase your products on TV like QVC or the Home Shopping Network, now's your opportunity. Support our American economy, grow your business, and be seen by loyal Patriot viewers across the country. Know someone with a business or have a business yourself? Don't miss out. Contact us at supportingpatriots.com today. Be a guest on this new exciting TV series. Let's put your American-made products in the spotlight.
Hey folks, it's your buddy John Rich here and co-founder of Old Glory Bank. Let me ask you a question. Why would you trust your banking with people that hate you? Well, you shouldn't. We're building a freedom economy, and now we have a pro-America bank. It's called Old Glory Bank. Check it out at oldglorybank.com and open yourself an account today.
Old Glory Bank is a full-service FDIC-insured online bank with business and consumer banking and customers in all 50 states. It takes just 8 minutes to open an account at oldglorybank.com.
And we are back once again. The book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. So you just kind of talked about that network of intel agents, officers that are extremely upset with the administration. Like you said, feel like their friends were not only betrayed but butchered. How do we get into the mafia in the United States and their role in this?
Yeah. And as you pointed out, it's not like the CIA literally relied on, was forced to rely on crime connections for a lot of operations. When you push comes to shove, if you need to smuggle weapons, if you need to smuggle people, if you need to do things outside the law and against foreign regimes where you're trying to revolt and overthrow governments, you tend to turn to the resources that are already doing things that are illegal, whether that's smugglers or burglars or whatever. For example, James Angleton, who I mentioned earlier, his group within CIA counterintelligence actually had an agreement with the FBI that when they recruited burglars, as Angleton and William Harvey did, either domestically or overseas, domestically, they would have to give the names to the FBI so these guys would not get busted while they're being used for operations. So there had to be some communications if you're kind of working on the dark side, the illegal side. So that was kind of routine. But in 1960, early 1961, before the Bay of Pigs, when the CIA decided that they were going to try to assassinate Castro to enable the regime overthrow, they needed connections inside Cuba. What connections do you find inside Cuba? They're the casino connections. The guys that had been operating in Cuba, Trafficante, Roselli himself had been assigned by Meyer Lansky to go into Cuba and clean up Cuban gambling operations for, the syndicate, because actually one of Nixon's buddies had gone into a casino and been taken and complained about it. And there was a lot of media heat about, rigged games. So they sent Roselli, Lansky sent Roselli down to his club and said, you got to clean this out among all the guys. And Roselli kind of became the guy, the consultant to make it look better than it was looking. So the CIA was referred to Roselli as the kind of guy who had these connections. And Roselli went to Giancana and Trafficante, got entrees to people in Cuba, and started this poison plot. Well, the poison plot failed right before the Bay of Pigs. But later, when the Cuban operation was reinvigorated under JFK, William Harvey, who was given the new project, the successor to the first one, goes back to Roselli and says, look, I need your expertise. They bonded. He trusted they would become lifelong friends and actually shared a lifelong hatred of JFK, which we actually have documented. You can find videos of how much Harvey personally hated Jack and Bobby Kennedy both. But they became friends. So he brings Roselli back in and they start a new round of contacts inside Cuba. Let's try to poison them again, or we'll send in rifle teams. So they started building rifle teams to go in. By the way, these would be the same rifle teams that we see in D because they were experienced. They'd been in training for 3-4 years to do attacks on Castro in Cuba, even while Castro traveled or at his resort. These guys had gone in and out of Cuba. They'd just not been able to get him. But Roselli is the key
before we keep going, just as you mentioned the rifle teams, in your opinion, and I want you to continue with the Roselli thing, when we are talking about rifle teams, are we talking about a triangulation in Dealey Plaza, so 3 shooters, or are we talking more than 3 shooters just in case, or do you believe 3?
I would say 3 shooters.
Uh-huh.
Now, whether all 3 fired or just 2 fired, but you'd position 3 shooters. And that would be, you need 3 shooters, you need a signal man on the ground. And what has come out recently is you probably have backup plans. You probably have another team somewhere else, probably on the road to the trade center where he's going to speak. The other thing that's a very speculative, but a very possibility is that they had an IED planted on the access route to the Stemmons Freeway, because some of the people involved in this, and one guy who's actually stated that he went to Dallas to build a bomb that would be used against JFK, but it wasn't needed. And the reason it wasn't needed is because the first rifle attack worked as planned. That's where a signalman comes in, kind of like abort. We don't need it, wave it off. So yeah, I would go down to there were enough shooters. And by the way, an important thing to remember is these guys wanted it to look like multiple shooters. There was no plan to make it look like a lone nut. It was supposed to look like multiple shooters and a Castro assassination team. We now know that the night of the assassination, these guys, associated with these guys, called Henry Luce's wife. Now, Luce is the guy in media in 1963, Life magazine, the whole Luce media network. His wife had been giving money to some of these guys, and they called her and told her they had total information about a Castro attack team that had come out of Mexico with Lee Harvey Oswald and done the attack. And if she had if that had made it into the headlines, we probably would have invaded Cuba. She did take it to the FBI eventually, but you can trace it back to this same nexus of people, I guess is what I'm getting at. So to answer your question, this is a paramilitary operation. It's not some guy in a storm drain. It's not one guy, behind the fence. It's structured and it's operational. The fingerprints of something serious are all over it. And that was one of the real problems is everybody thought there were multiple shooters, right? Connolly is going, there was a burst of rifle fire. It was like machine gun fire. There was no doubt from the people in Dealey Plaza that there were multiple shooters, which is why the Warren Commission and Johnson and White, it was so difficult to suppress the fact that there really was, come out, support the lone nut thing. No, that's going to be a challenge. Even Hoover was told that Sunday afternoon that it was going to be difficult to write the FBI report around just Oswald, and he said, "I don't care, do it."
So let's talk about that aspect. How high up does this go? Obviously Dulles, his name is out there, Alan Dulles. Roger Stone is adamant it was LBJ that ordered the whole thing. You look at, a lot of the players surrounding that and how quickly power turned over. Man, I forget who. Jack Valente is on the plane while he's getting sworn in. Talk about mafia connections, and then Valente himself will end up becoming the head of the Motion Picture Association of America in Hollywood. People don't understand those connections. I mean, they're huge. Who are some of the top players, before we take our final break, that were either in the know, allowed this to happen, were part of the cover-up after the fact, etc.? And do you think that they'll be implicated with these document dumps?
Yeah. The first answer to the question, and by the way, Valenti managed to suppress the two of the video segments from The Men Who Killed Kennedy that would have pointed towards Johnson, so nothing suspicious there. I've been down all those rabbit holes, and I'd like to characterize this as where I diverge from the Oswald puzzle. 2/3 of it is a strict biography of Oswald, pure history. The third part of it is speculation about Oswald, what he himself was doing on the 21st. But when you're asking about the conspiracy, I outline this in Tipping Point, specifically talking about the conspirators. Our view is it starts at the highest levels of the CIA with Angleton, Harvey, and also with an outreach via Johnny Roselli to Lyndon Johnson. And I know that's hard to take. Going down the Johnson rat hole is difficult, but there's a real good case, and you can even document it, that one of Roselli's closest lifetime friends, Fred Black, was a business associate of Bobby Baker. I found a document showing Fred Black and Bobby Baker in Johnson's office during the height or the beginning of the Baker scandal. If that document had gone to the congressional committee that was investigating Johnson, he's done. In 1963, nothing scared Johnson more. It was just the ammunition that Kennedy needed to dump him off the ticket, which Kennedy wanted to do. But worse than that, it would probably have gotten impeached, because nothing concerned Johnson more at that time. That he really, there was an evidentiary trail and people willing to testify. So my view is that Johnson got compromised. He didn't start it. He wasn't driving it. He wasn't in position. He didn't have the resources to see what we see in Dealey Plaza. These other guys had the resources and had the means to exfiltrate the resources. Can't even get, we know now how we think they got all of the people I'm talking about that would have been tactically involved were outside the U.S., black infiltrated under a CIA cover program, and in the Caribbean, and later on in Africa and South America afterwards. But you ask about this link. The link comes through Roselli's friends. These are his contacts compromise Johnson. They tell him, don't worry, you're okay. Kennedy, it's not an issue. Don't worry about it. And we can see that in Johnson's phone calls, and it's in the record. But Roselli's contacts reach further than that. In 63, if you want to tie Roselli in, so, okay, we've got a nexus of people, high levels of CIA, where the word starts, enabling it down to Miami, but this same nexus has contacts that can get them to Lyndon Johnson, who they know is seriously concerned about what JFK is going to do. They also have connections to Dallas, and the connection to Dallas goes through Los Angeles, which is Roselli's home base, to Dallas, and the phone calls that Jack Ruby gets the afternoon of the assassination. We can place Jack Ruby in Vegas beforehand. The Warren Commission managed to ignore that, but that's where the initial Roselli's home bases were LA and Vegas. That's where the connection to Ruby comes in. And the afternoon of the assassination, Jack was doing something he's a field guy. If you're going to do an operation like this, you need some locals. You need local supports. Nobody's going to do it without, who knows dirty cops that we could get to do minor things? Who knows? How about the motorcade route? How about the school book depository? if we want to plant a rifle in the school depository, who do we know who knows somebody who can plant the rifle? Jack Ruby.
Larry, let's take one final break, and then let's really get into Oswald. Do you think he was a part of this at all? Is he a full patsy? Where is he when this occurs? The book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. We're going to be back after this with the final segment of Making Sense of the Madness.
Hey folks, it's your buddy John Rich here and co-founder of Old Glory Bank. Let me ask you a question. Why would you trust your banking with people that hate you? Well, you shouldn't. We're building a freedom economy, and now we have a pro-America bank. It's called Old Glory Bank. Check it out at oldglorybank.com and open yourself an account today.
Old Glory Bank is a full-service, FDIC-insured online bank with business and consumer banking and customers in all 50 states. Takes just 8 minutes to open an account at oldglorybank.com.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
You know, if I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep. It's showing up more energy, more get up and go, and it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
To try Cardio Miracle for yourself and get a special fan discount, go to the host page right now and click the link for Cardio Miracle.
And we are back. All right, Larry, let's get the goods. There's a lot of speculation, full patsy, part of the team, in the book depository, not in the book depository, shot the cop, didn't shoot the cop, in the movie theater waiting for one of his assets or handlers, etc. What is your thought on Oswald that day? Is he a part of it in any way, shape, or form?
And the good news is we spend about a third of the book laying that out, even though it's speculation. So the bottom line, and it may shock some people, Oswald was exactly what he said he was, a total patsy. He had no clue as to the attack on JFK. He had no role in the attack on JFK. He was totally framed by the planting of a rifle that could be traced to him. That's it. If you look at all the other evidence, most of it, the chain of possessions have been debunked. There, in any event, bottom line, what Oswald thought was going to happen, because we have to deal with the fact that that day his behavior was anomalous. For example, we know, and we illustrate in the book, that Oswald was a news geek. He watched TV all the time. He read constantly, subscribed to publications constantly. Certainly, Oswald knew that JFK was coming to Dallas. Okay, the fact, and Oswald was also anything but a fanboy. Even though he thought JFK was okay, you're not going to find him outside cheering. He's kind of unique in that way. He doesn't go along with the herd. He does things his own way. But what Oswald thought was going to happen that day in Dallas was the people that had been in contact with him, the anti-Castro Cubans, who were posing as pro-Castro and even as Castro agents, had been offering to help him get into Cuba and get involved in supporting the revolution, the socialist revolution throughout the Caribbean. Before Dallas, between New Orleans and Dallas, they had even taken him to a longtime Castro gun runner named McCowan, who had supplied guns to the Castro Revolution, who was a close personal friend. Castro had visited him when he had come to the U.S. They take Oswald there and go to this guy to buy guns for a revolution in Central America. They're selling this whole story to Oswald, that they're pro-Castro, he's pro-Castro, he wants to go to Cuba, they're going to help him. In Dallas, the week of the assassination, they took him to Redbird Airport. They took him in a car to Redbourne Airport. They approached Ray January, worked with Ray and his information for ages. And essentially, he reported this to the FBI within a week after the assassination. The FBI just didn't want to hear this story. That's documented. But they tried or wanted to lease an aircraft for a long range flight. They kept talking about the Yucatan and did it have enough fuel? We got to make sure Ray January at the time was worried that they wanted to get a plane to hijack to Cuba because that had become a thing. Hijacking planes to Cuba was a thing. That was the way to show, your support for the regime. January had been concerned about that. They had left this guy who he identified as Oswald later in the car, so he couldn't hear the exact dialogue. He knew, he could see what was going on. He couldn't hear what January was saying, which was January turned down the deal. In any event, what Oswald was set up to believe that when the president was in town and all the attention was on the president, all he had to do was leave the school book depository, contact his friends, pro-Cuban friends at the school book depository, by the way. They would drive him to the airport. We get on this airplane and you're going to be in Cuba. And by the way, when you arrive in Cuba, you're going to be a big name. It's not like Russia where you ended up working in a factory. You're going to have a media venue to support yourself as a real friend of the revolution. So it's going to be much better than what happened to you before. Now, of course, the story was, and we have this from sources actually that went to the House Select Committee, that he was supposed to be executed, killed as part of the attack, information planted in a way to further tie him to Castro and Castro agents. He was supposed to be a tool in framing Fidel Castro in Cuba. That was his role. Totally, of course, obviously, totally unknown to him. So that was to be his role. And as this source, John Martino, who I've written about extensively, met with his son, the whole thing aborted. Oswald went off the rails. As he left the school book depository and started hearing news about the attack on the president, especially when he had heard that he had been killed, he doesn't know what's coming down. Wait a minute. This is supposed to be a diversion, but not that kind of a diversion. And by the way, I left the school book depository. They're going to be hunting for me. I should not have done that. Wait a minute. There's a problem. So from then on, everything, he gets the cab, drops him off away from his apartment house, not at his apartment. He's already suspicious. Like he checks out the apartment house before he gets there, and he picks up his pistol at the apartment house, which nobody has ever figured out why Lee Harvey Oswald would take a rifle to kill the president and not take his pistol, right? Okay, right? Because you might need to escape or something, or go out in a burst of glory, whatever. But no, leaves the pistol there, picks up the pistol, which, of course, if he had just been on his way to hijack an airplane, you might need a pistol for that. But in any event, so he has a pistol. The Tippit encounter, very possible. There are a lot of questions about Tippit and why he was where he was. I think that's suspicious. Tippit and 2 or 3 other quote unquote police that Jack Ruby knew could have been maneuvered into situations to do things as part of this plot, not even fully knowing what was going on, and hung out. Basically, that's the way this always works. If you want it deniable, you have to have people that look suspicious after the fact that aren't linked to you, right? They're part of the plot, but who do they know? And do you really want to investigate that? Do you really want to investigate the police officer?
Final minute of the broadcast. The documents. Are we going to get them all? Are they going to tell us the truth? Or are they just going to give us more little rabbit trails to go off and be limited hangout?
We're not going to get the ones we need. The reason I say that is there's a body of documents that has already been collected. You could release all of those, even unredacted, and it wouldn't give us the full story. There's another body of documents that were never collected that we're aware of. And we're trying to make this there's several of us trying to make this available to the DNI and to this team or Congressman Luna. If they will just ask, we'll tell them what we need and where it's sitting. But they're going to have to go get those. They're not going to be given.
Larry, a pleasure. The book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. You know the drill over here. It is not about left or right to this guy. It is always about right and wrong. I want to thank you guys for watching me right here on Patriot.tv, 5 days a week where the truth lives. I absolutely love you guys, and we'll see you on the flip side.